Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Maedi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam Tenamam Pahi Nityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Today we are gifted with our Swami Arupeshananda. Swami is a long-time Vedanta sadhaka. He was actually, I would say, born into this tradition. Last time you came here, Swami, was back in...
About 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Okay. So I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. I'm just going to give you a little pre-bio because most of you don't even know him. So Swami was actually, when I said born into this tradition, his parents were disciples of Swami Prabhavananda. So as a little child, he was going to the Vedanta Society in Hollywood. Swami Prabhavananda, who was the creator of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, nicknamed him, seeing this little kid with his red hair and his round face, called him Lal Chand. Lal Chand means, Lal means red, Chand means moon, the red moon. So that became his nickname. He then went on and he actually got his initiation from his guru, who was Swami Aseshanandaji. Swami Aseshanandaji was the last living monastic disciple of Holy Mother, who was in Portland and had his Mahasamadhi in 1996. So he's from a descendant of someone who actually used to know Holy Mother, knew her, and he got initiated from Holy Mother's disciple. He actually came here back somewhere when he was going to college. He went to UCSD, and for a time he lived in the monastery with Swami Atmarupananda. He could tell you about those experiences, growing experiences. Later on, he actually got his PhD in classical physics, studying, I'm never going to get this, but he actually studied in Alaska, those, what are they called, the aurora lights? The aurora lights. He studied the physics of those lights. He went on and became a monk. He joined our Trabuco order, and he was there for many years. And during those years, he actually had the ability to take care, we're calling a sevak, to many of our great swamis in the order. Swami Tadatmananda, if you go to Trabuco, the painting Swami, who's done all the paintings, he took care of him. Asim Chaitanya, a brother monk in Trabuco, Swami Bhadrananda. So many of these swamis he had the privilege of having first-hand experience with and living with them, taking care of them. He eventually went on to Pinyon Hills in the desert, where he was there for 10 years in doing spiritual practices. Now, currently, he's come back to Hollywood, and he'll be serving in Hollywood for some time, where he'll be going to India in the near future to do a little tapasya. So today, we are privileged to have Swami Arupeshananda, and I forget what your talk is. It's one of Swami Ashokananda's talk, but we'll be privileged to hear him speak. Swami Arupeshananda.
A very generous introduction there, and whatever the title of today's talk is, it's bound to be a disappointment after that introduction. But the title of today's talk is The World of Infinite Light. And as he said, my name is Swami Arupeshananda. I got the title of this talk from a lecture given by Swami Ashokananda in San Francisco. I think it was probably in the 1950s. And those of you who are familiar with Ashokananda know, he has many lectures published. He's one of these guys who never wrote a book, but whose words were so impressive that the people around him decided that they should be scribes and write this stuff down. And so there are many books attributed to him that he did not write, but are his lectures that have been transcribed and edited. This is one of them. It is called The World of Infinite Light. And for those of you who have read Swami Ashokananda, you know that his lectures typically will sort of start off maybe on the ground floor and then take you up to just truly dizzying heights of spirituality. And this is no exception to that rule. And I hesitated to give this talk because I thought, what can you really add to this lecture? I mean, you can't really do anything you can't really clarify I can tell you my insights, but I don't have any. What he's going to talk about is basically unknown to me. On the other hand, I love this talk. I really do. I just love this lecture. I've read it so many times. And I thought, even if you have nothing interesting, like insight-wise, you love this talk, and maybe you can just share your joy that you experienced with this talk with these people. So here we are. That's what we're going to do, or I'm going to try and do, is share my joy with this lecture. A lot of this lecture is about life after death, what happens when we die, where we go. And so I'll start there with life after death. Probably I don't have to convince you of this, but you never know. Some people are skeptical that anything happens after death. The standard materialist viewpoint is that you go to sleep and you never wake up. That's it. You die. And just like the puppet is dead on the floor, the strings are cut, no more puppet, that's the end of your consciousness. This is becoming an increasingly unreasonable position to hold on to. Why? Because there is an extensive literature of near-death experiences. People who flatline, and then what they do is they float above their body and have all kinds of, maybe they enter what sounds a lot like a wormhole. I'm a physics nerd. It sounds a lot like a wormhole that you enter into, and then you actually fly through this universe somewhere and wind up on some other planet. Happens all the time in these near-death experiences. And this other planet is full of amazing flowers or colors or music or people or whatever. Or you stay in the room and you listen to the nurses talk and you report on their conversation after you come back to life, and you tell them what they said about you and what they were even thinking sometimes. And they say, how did you know that? You were dead on the table, and yet you know everything that happened in the room. So what these people experience, and what is becoming increasingly difficult to deny, is that consciousness does not arise in this body. The big problem with the materialist viewpoints is explaining how consciousness arises from matter. Once you assume that consciousness arises from matter, the materialist viewpoint is actually pretty self-consistent. But there's no way to show that. That is taken as axiomatic, and it directly contradicts the near-death literature. Why? Because they know from firsthand experience that consciousness does not arise in this body, it resides in this body. It leaves this body. When this body dies, this consciousness continues, unbroken. So that, if you're going to deny that, if you're going to say, I don't believe that, that means there are thousands of testimonies from all over the world that you are going to claim are fraudulent. That's one reason to believe that there is a continuation of this consciousness after death. These people will all testify to this fact unanimously. There is not one person with a near-death experience who will say anything different than this. Number two, not only does consciousness continue after this body, but it is increasingly difficult to plausibly maintain that this consciousness wasn't somewhere before this body came into being. In other words, it didn't arise here, it was somewhere else, it's here for a while, and it's going forward after this thing dies. This is a glorified spacesuit. And what Swami Ashokananda is going to talk about is a variety of spacesuits that we can wear in different levels of this universe. And they are, according to the Hindus, objective worlds. In other words, things we can see in the night sky. Now, why, before I get there, why is it implausible or unreasonable to say that consciousness arose from this body and then goes on forever into other bodies and other worlds and all this stuff? Why is that unreasonable? Because of the testimony of past life memories in children. There are not too many children who remember their past lives, but there are enough to have a pretty extensive literature. And one of the things that they can do is remember impossible things, things that are, statistically speaking, no way they could have made this up, and they are frequently greeted by very skeptical parents who are out to disprove this and prove that their kid is actually nuts. There are books about this. Some of them are fascinating, and they're mostly easy reads. So you say, well, how come we all don't remember? I don't know, we don't. But the fact that a few people do, and they remember in such detail as cannot really be explained any other way. I mean, you get people who try, but the logic that they employ is clearly, transparently motivated. And so this paradigm of a consciousness that is traveling around this physical universe that we see is temporarily inhabiting this thing that we call a body. And then when this body fails, we'll continue to go on and have other adventures in other worlds and maybe back on this one or whatever. That is, in my view, the most reasonable working hypothesis for people, whether you're spiritual or not. This, I believe, is the most reasonable position to hold. Okay, so the Hindus have said for thousands of years that these worlds are objective worlds like ours, but they are of different materials. This world we're living in here is called Loka. It is governed by the earth principle. What does that mean? It doesn't mean dirt. It doesn't mean earth as we know it. What it means is a principle of maximal objectivity. So in other words, I'm standing up here at this podium, and that means I can't stand where the podium is. If someone else wants to stand up at this podium, they have to push me out of the way. My body excludes other bodies. That is maximum exclusion principle. That is the earth principle. My body is also completely opaque. You cannot see, all you can see is the surface. You don't know what's behind this puppet. So these two principles, maximum exclusivity, minimum knowledge. In other words, you cannot see into the person. You look at a person's face, you infer their mind, you infer their personality. You say, well, it looks like a nice person or a happy person or a mean person or whatever. But you do not know these things just by looking. You have to infer it, and you may be wrong. So this is the earth principle, and this is what governs this planet. And as I go on and describe Swami Ashokananda's view of this universe and the various worlds that we can go to when we die, we will find that, especially as we get to the higher worlds, the more spiritual, loftier worlds, that his description of these worlds and the beings in these worlds differs significantly from the Puranas. I confirmed this with some other Swamis that I live with. There's one nice thing about living in Hollywood now, and that is I have other Swamis around to bounce stuff off of. And they confirmed, yes, you won't find this stuff anywhere else. I looked it up with ChatGPT, which is somewhat reliable. And yeah, basically the Puranas contradict a lot of what Ashokananda is going to say today. And so, as in so many other Ashokananda lectures, he comes out with a lot of ipsy-dixits, that is, assertions based on personal authority. And so, in order to have a faith in the assertions based on personal authority that Swami Ashokananda comes out with, I think it's valuable to have a little understanding of who this guy is before I talk about what he says. So, who is Swami Ashokananda? He is, in our order, as far as I know, the only Swami to be initiated by a guru who is no longer in a physical body. He is a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda died when he was probably about 8 or 9 years old, 1902. he got initiated by Swami Vivekananda in a meditation experience when he was in high school. I'm going to describe this meditation experience. This is the Swami talking. This is about a year before his death. These are the kinds of things Swamis aren't just going to tell you. You have to wait until very close to they die. And then they'll come out with some real gems at the end. I've seen this myself. Like he said, I've taken care of some Swamis. And at the end, sometimes some really nice stuff gets loosened. So he said this, I think, within a year of his passing. I had been meditating on the Divine Mother. Then suddenly the Divine Mother was replaced by Swamiji, that is Vivekananda. Swamiji was infusing his spirit into me. It was a very strange experience, I can only imagine. I've never had a spirit infused into me, but it sounds like a very unusual experience. It was very sudden and unexpected. The change was very distinct. And immediately I began to feel that Swamiji was pouring his power and spirit into me. It was a definite and unmistakable experience. Just as you would put the mouth of a full jar against the mouth of an empty one, one on top of the other, and just as the contents of the first would pour into the second, so his power poured into me without reservation or obstruction. And with all that, the experience actually, I mean, if you can try and imagine what that's like, you're sitting and meditating, this amazing thing happens. It actually, in typical Ashokananda fashion, gets more amazing. Swamiji's mind and mine became merged. Mind and mine, my mind and his mind became merged. I was astonished, and that brought me out of that state. That's an interesting statement. I was astonished, and that brought me out of that state. Why? Because now the minds were merged. One of them becomes astonished. The other one's not astonished. So that unity is displaced from this sense of astonishment. I am the astonished one. I am separate. Before that, there was a unity of mind. A little later, he says, but the thing had been accomplished fully, so he didn't blow it. He didn't get nervous. A little while later, I looked at myself in a mirror and found that the whites of my eyes were deep red. So you know something happened. You're sitting in the shrine and some amazing thing happens and you feel whatever spirit pouring into you, whatever that means. I've never had this experience, clearly. And then you get up, you feel like, wow, what was that? And you look and something has entered into you so fully that it's blown all the blood vessels in the whites of your eyes and they are deep red. So this was not your imagination. That you know. And yet, and of course, with all legitimate spiritual experiences, he says, and this is a good way when we sort of question our own experiences, how to measure them. He says, it was a blissful experience. He poured his love over me. I could not believe it. I was his own, his very darling. I knew he was my teacher. So now, here's something I think we can all relate to, and that is, after this experience, what happens? He doubts it. I believe that we have all had our spiritual experiences. Of course, I don't think any of us have had this one or anything like it, but we've had something, or we wouldn't be here today. You wouldn't have come here today unless you'd gotten some kind of invitation, spiritual invitation, knock on your door. Okay, God knocked down Ashokananda's door, but he's knocked on all of our doors. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And what happens during a spiritual experience, whatever it is, you meet a great soul, or you hear some inspiring teaching, or maybe you have a dream or just a good meditation, or whatever it is, you're just curious about this, something incited you to do it. And when that happens, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's blissful. And then it's over. And you're back to this world of more or less ordinary people who don't seem to treat you any differently. And things just seem to go on as they did before. And you think, was that real? Because now I seem to be back down to sea level here. And so what to make of this? So we have this problem. Ashokananda has this problem. Even Sri Ramakrishna had this problem. Amazingly, talk about the person who's had the most exalted, unbelievable spiritual experiences that probably have ever been documented. Sri Ramakrishna, you read his spiritual experiences, and what does he say afterwards. I used to say, I shall take all this, in other words, his spiritual experiences. I shall take all this to be true if I meet a certain person, or if a certain officer of the temple garden talks to me. In other words, what was that? I doubt that that actually happened, and I need external confirmation. Even Sri Ramakrishna needs external confirmation in this way. And I have to say that we don't get what we want. What we want is an instruction manual. You have your spiritual experience, and then after it's over, the instruction manual says, here's what it meant, here's why you got it, here's what you're supposed to do with it, and this is how you're supposed to lead the rest of your life, and this is what this means in context with other people and your job and your wife and your family and your everything, all that. Here is the manual for the experience you just had. As far as I know, that has never happened. As far as I know, I have never read anybody getting a spiritual experience accompanied by a manual of instruction with how to use it and what to do with it, what it meant, where it came from, all these things. I've never heard that happening. Why not? Well, you could say God's kind of a prankster because he knows that we want this. Everybody wants this. We all want our instruction manual. We all want to know, what was that? Was that real? Did it really happen? What am I supposed to do with that? Everything seems to be normal again. So he knows that we want it and he doesn't give it to us. So you could say God's a stinker. Never a good explanation. Never a good explanation for what happens in your life. Always available to you, this explanation, God is a stinker. For me, never constructive. Always find a better explanation than that one. That one presents itself to you first a lot of the time. A better explanation. Love. Also, frequently, an explanation that works in our self-inquiry is love. Why would God not give us an instruction manual out of love? Well, let's think about what we would do if we got our instruction manual. If we got the instruction manual, said all these things, this is your spiritual experience, this is what it means, this is what you do, and this is how you live your life from this day forward, what would you do? Thanks, God, see you later. I got the manual. I guess after we're done, I'll come back and talk to you about it. We'll see how we did. Right? That's what we would do. No, that's not what we're supposed to do. I mean, what was that? What does it mean? It means you forget God entirely because you've got the manual. You don't need him anymore. What do we do without the manual? Hello, God, are you there? What was that? What did that mean? God, can you come in and tell me this? God is in the thought of the mind repeatedly because we don't know what to do with this thing that just happened. And what happens when God is in the thought of the mind repeatedly? Love grows in the heart. That's why we try and think of God in meditation, so love will grow in the heart. And so you could say that God doesn't give us the instruction manual out of love. However you explain it, I recommend trying love first. However you explain whatever you explain, I recommend trying love first. Anyway, like the rest of us, Swami Ashokananda wants outward confirmation, and he gets it. He goes to some of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, and they all say, yes, you have been initiated by Swami Vivekananda. This experience you had in the shrine was an initiation experience of Swami Vivekananda. Swami Turiyananda actually specifies that there are 3 kinds of initiation when Ashokananda approaches him about this. He says one kind comes directly from Shiva and is called Shambhava. Swami Turiyananda doesn't explain it. You look it up, and basically it means like a blood transfusion, sort of, I guess. I don't know, you just transfer spirituality into this being somehow. It's not very clear because probably not very many people have had it. And so that's the best I could find. Another is called Shakti initiation. It is made, this is equally mysterious, but this is number 2. It is made up of knowledge that enters into the disciple's body. That's Shakti initiation. Number 3 is what probably those of us who have taken spiritual instruction from a guru, this is probably what we all got, which is the usual kind, in which the guru gives instruction to the disciple when he's sitting next to him, do this, do that, meditate on this, repeat this mantra, whatever it is. That is, ordinary people like us, we get this one. Swami Turiyananda said that Swami Ashokananda got number 2, this Shakti initiation, this direct transfer of knowledge into the body of the individual, which I guess explains the whites of the eyes, I guess. So, and then Turiyananda goes on to say some very encouraging things. He says, you don't have to do anything. What you have received is enough. It will go on working and you will reach the goal. Swamiji will himself make you do what is necessary. You don't have to think about it. That is like winning the lottery, you got to admit. You don't have to do anything, you don't have to think. These are the two things that we do not want to have to deal with, doing and thinking. And now that he's just taken them off the table. So he is of a very high spiritual pedigree, I guess you could say. That's why I told you all this, is so that hopefully when he starts telling us about these other worlds, we can have, and the people, the beings, I should say, that live in these other worlds and what these other worlds are like, we can have some faith in his words. So, I already talked a little bit about Bur Loka, where we are now, this earth world. And according to the Puranic ideas, there are earth worlds all over the night sky. And this is not scientifically hard to imagine because we have been discovering what we call exoplanets now for at least 20 or 30 years. So basically, the stars that we see in the night sky are pretty much solar systems like our own. Above Bur Loka is something called Bhuvar Loka. This is governed by the water principle. Again, the water principle is not the stuff we wash our hands with. It's not actual physical water. The idea is that the water principle suffers less from the earth principle's defects. The earth principle's defects, if you recall from the beginning I said, maximum objectivity, minimum knowledge. The water principle has less of these things, less objectivity, more knowledge. The analogy is water. So you think about two football players, they, opposite teams, they run up, they bap into each other, right? And they bounce off or whatever. One of them they will fall down. If you imagine two water waves that do the same thing, they don't do that. They meet in the middle. There's a kind of union where they increase in amplitude and then they continue on their merry way. So that principle of exclusion isn't there. There is more of a unity, more of a sharing, more of an understanding of the other individual if you can have this kind of intimate interaction with them. And also, water is clearly more translucent than dirt. So in that sense also, there is more knowledge of the other individual. So in this higher world, there is less objectivity, means less selfishness, more understanding, greater sense of unity. Bhuvar Loka. Who goes there? Who goes there when they die are generally what you would consider good people. Not necessarily spiritual people, but sort of doers of good deeds go there. Moderately good. Better doers of good deeds, who might or might not be spiritual, go to the next one up, called Svar Loka. Svar Loka is governed by the principle of fire. This is where the devas, the shining ones, they're shining because of this fire principle. So again, same idea that there is less exclusion, more knowledge, less selfishness, more understanding in this world governed by the fire principle, the Svar Loka, typically considered heaven in the Puranas. Now, here Ashokananda and the Puranas part company, because the Puranas will say that on world number 4, as we're ascending to these higher spiritual worlds, world number 4, according to most Puranic interpretations, you can achieve what is called Krama Mukti from world number 4. What does that mean? Krama Mukti is a kind of gradual liberation. So you tried here, it didn't work out, you couldn't concentrate in meditation or whatever, you fell short of the goal, however you fell short of the goal, so many ways to fall short of the goal are there. Then what happens is you can go to world number 4, Maharloka, and continue your journey. You don't have to come back here and start again. Ashokananda says no. He says the first 4 worlds, you have to come back to Earth. He says they're basically unspiritual worlds. What does that mean, unspiritual worlds? It means that while you have this greater understanding, you have this greater ability to share, less exclusion, less selfishness. The worlds are just too much fun. They're just too good. It's a world of parties and palaces and beautiful people wearing beautiful clothes, having sophisticated conversations, and doing all, basically it's the Oscars, like so much better all the time, never getting boring. Every speech is wonderful. And then every other kind of Oscar-like adventure you could imagine. All these things, it's just too compelling. No one there says, well, I think I'll just go to my room and meditate today. Because the fun cannot be ignored. This is the basic idea. And so the Puranas will tell you that Maharloka, number 4, is actually somewhat spiritual, and there's some sort of studious people that go there, and they're more interested in wisdom than parties. But Ashokananda says no. He says the bottom 4 worlds, you're going to have a wonderful time, and when you're done, you're coming back here and you're starting again. And then after number 4, we come to number 5. This is Janarloka. Again, depending on who you talk to, Swami Ashokananda says this is governed by the fire principle. Most of the Puranas will tell you that this is governed by either the air or the water principle. Air principle. So he kind of puts it down a rank from the Puranic evaluation of the world. But he does say, for the first time, man comes into his own. He begins to realize who and what he is in Janarloka. You begin to see your own divinity. You become aware of your own spiritual essence, spiritual identity. And now when we get to number 6, Tapoloka, this is where Swami Ashokananda seems to supply all this information that you cannot find anywhere else. He says Tapoloka is made of the principle of air. Air is clear and transparent and does not obstruct our vision, which gives us a clue to this world. There our knowledge is unimpeded and unobstructed. We know things rightly, and there is no exclusion of one by another. There is a sense of unity with all. Now, who goes here? Spiritually very advanced people. Those who have become very highly advanced in this life have become so full of truth that they do not see this untruth. That's a very interesting sentence he ends with here. They do not see this untruth. What is this untruth? This untruth is this world that we are living in now. This is, plainly speaking, the Matrix. Y'all saw the movie a long time ago, The Matrix? This is not what's really happening. This world, as Swami Vivekananda says, is not what it appears. It is untruth. What does that mean? From the cosmological standpoint in Hinduism, in the beginning of a cosmological cycle, there is one unified, undifferentiated, blissful, loving, spiritual consciousness. That's where it starts. Somehow, mysteriously, nobody can really explain how or why. At least I've never found a satisfactory explanation. From this undifferentiated, perfect, loving being, knowledge, wisdom, bliss, absolute, comes a little tiny ether principle. Just the littlest, tiniest differentiation. Negligible differentiation. From the ether principle grows, and from the ether principle comes the air principle, slightly denser, slightly more exclusion. But still it is all mostly light, as he describes here. This Tapoloka is the light of God shining through everything. After the air principle comes the fire principle. Things are slightly more obscured. I mean, fire is obviously bright, but you can't see through fire to the other side. And then on down the list, there's water principle and then earth principle. So there is this light of God in the beginning of creation. It is increasingly excluded by all these elements that grow in objectivity. So what does that mean? It means we are living in the shadow of God here. This world is a shadow world. The light and truth of God permeates everything, and we are in the shadow of this Bur Loka. It's like Plato's cave, sort of, except not really. But the idea is that we're living in this kind of shadow world. It is untruth in that sense. And he says people who enter Tapoloka have become free of this untruth. So he describes someone in this world and what they do. He says, when they look at a person, I guess that's person in this world, this is actually a little confusing in the lecture. I'll explain why. He says, when they look at a person, they do not first of all perceive his body or his mind, they perceive the higher mind. They also have a definite perception of the true person, which is spirit, which is neither man nor woman and which hasn't any form. So this is, when he says they look at a person, they do not first of all perceive his body, it's unclear in the lecture if he's talking about people who are living in this world or people on this planet who have reached this state of consciousness. And there is an instance in our order of a Swami, Swami Shivananda, who actually did this a few times towards the end of his life. There's one instance where a disciple of his, he's sitting in a chair and a disciple of his walks into the room. Someone that he has initiated walks into the room and he bows down to the disciple. And the disciple is shocked and says, "Holy sir, don't you recognize me? I am your disciple and you bow down to me." And Shivananda laughs and says, "My boy, when I see anyone, first I see God, then I see the person." And so that's the idea. He was living in this state of consciousness right here. He even did that with a cat. So first you see this one blissful, loving existence. And then when one of the people in the matrix says, "Hey, I'm your disciple," you go, "Oh yeah, you're that one." You sort of bring your mind down somehow to this ordinary perception and acknowledge this kind of shadow world that we're living in. So when he says they look at a person, I think he's talking about the people in Tapaloka, but it becomes less and less clear if we're talking about a physical world or a state of consciousness here. And I'm not sure if that distinction is actually avoidable. And now he says, what kind of people here are qualified to go to this Tapaloka when they die? He says the clue to such advanced people is that they like to be meditative. This does not mean that you sit in the shrine in a meditation posture with closed eyes all the time. If only it were so easy. He says, rather, their heart is always on God. It's the difficult one, where you have to have constant recollectedness. The heart is always going to God. There's a yearning for God, or a consciousness, a fullness even of God in the heart all the time. Wherever they look, the thought of God comes to them because everywhere the reality is God. They become free of the tendency to negate the existence of God. That is the secret of this Bur Loka that we're in. This negating the existence of God is this shadow universe that we are living in. From this creation in the beginning, all these elements, they have negated in some sense the perception of God. So they become free of this tendency to negate the perception of God. Okay. Now he talks about how they walk around and act in this world, amazingly. He says they actually see spirits. We do not see things rightly at all. We see spirit as a bundle of flesh. But one who has gained this world of spirituality actually perceives everyone as spirits. Whether he talks, or whether he walks, or whether he meditates, he is aware of this one divine existence, one blessed spirit everywhere, one real being. There is nothing else. That alone exists. He becomes aware of it. And when he gives up this body, he goes to this world of Tapaloka. Now he's going to describe the world. This world is luminous. You may wonder how it can be luminous, since it is made up of the air principle. I don't know if you remember that, but we're still in the air world. Air doesn't shine. Air is transparent, but air does not obstruct the luminosity of shining things, and spirit is luminous. So now we have a picture of this world. It's an airy world with airy stuff and filled with luminous spirits. So you have luminous spirits in a very rarefied atmosphere interacting with each other. And knowledge is unimpeded and bliss is unbroken. He says, it is all lights. One who goes to that world perceives everyone, everything as luminous spirit. Therefore, everywhere it is lights. So we are now entering the world of infinite lights. He talks a little bit about the lower worlds first. He says in the lower worlds, the form, earth form, water form, fire form, may be shining. We're still shining here, us, now. But the substance is hidden behind these flesh masks. You cannot see what is on the other side of a wall of fire. You cannot see what is on the other side of a wall of flesh. You will see the luminous form, but not the reality. Only when you reach Tapoloka, where the form is transparent, this air principle, almost invisible, does the reality which is spirit shine in all its glory. And it is here that you first enter the world of infinite lights. It is said, notice he says, it is said, that souls who have attained this degree of illumination may never come back to this world. This is interesting, because if you read Swami Ashokananda's lectures, he will come up with these amazing spiritual teachings that you can't believe, where's he getting this stuff? And then in the middle of that, he'll say, and it is said, or and people say, or and it is written. In other words, this part I don't know from personal experience. This is something he does repeatedly in his talks. And you read these things and you think, how can this guy have had all these experiences? Well, I'll get to that at the end. He says, many will remain in Tapaloka throughout the rest of this creative period. That is heaven in a divine sense. In other words, it's not a continuous party. This is a blissful experience of expanded love in a higher world. It's not, somebody said something clever or somebody looks really good today, that kind of, or we really had a good dance tune or whatever it is at a party. It's not that. It is a sense of bliss that does not leave us. Heaven in that sense. Now, remember, we're only on number 6. So he's going to point out the limitation to this world, how we get to number 7 from here. He said, even here, this is still a world. In other words, one of these things we see in the sky. I don't know if it's a planet or a star or whatever, but it's a world. There is still form. Although that form is made up of an airy substance, relativity has not yet been transcended. The sense of I and you. I see that you are a blissful spiritual being like I am, and we're living in this airy fairy world, and everything's wonderful all the time, I guess. But there's still I-you separation relativity. So that means we can go higher. He says, so there's yet a higher world, the world of Brahman, Brahmaloka. It is made of the ether principle, finer still than air. The word they use for ether is akasha, which literally means sky, but what it means is no obstruction. What little obstruction air gives you, sky gives you nothing. He says, it is a sky without color, without anything in it. Souls who in this earthly life have almost reached the highest illumination go to that world, which is the last of all worlds, and they never come back. After having stayed there, they become Brahman. Even the little relativity that remains melts away, and the soul realizes its destiny. This is an important point that he says in many places. This is our destiny. This knowledge of the truth of our shining, loving, blissful existence is where we are all headed. We will all get there. Everyone, without exception. Sri Ramakrishna says the same thing, and it is the general Hindu belief. So, 2 big questions here, at least came to me. Number 1, how does he know this stuff? Number 2, how do we get there? I mean, how can we know this stuff? He knows this stuff. Can we know this stuff? Well, of course, that's one of the things that these great souls all tell us. They don't say, I have this knowledge and you can't have it. Not one ever says that. They say, I have this knowledge and you can also have it, and here's how you get it. That's what they tell us, as unbelievable as that may seem. So how does he know all this? We can actually get a hint, sort of, maybe we could just sort of think through it and get it. How did he experience these worlds? Clearly he didn't disappear or die. I mean, he didn't just fly up, beam up like Star Trek. Oh, he's gone today. I guess he's in Tapaloka or whatever. He'll be back tomorrow or something. His body stayed here. His consciousness, his mind, whatever you want to call it, ascended to these other worlds and had these other experiences. How can we do this? He says, he who would have this knowledge, in other words, what I've been telling you, for his lectures went long, like an hour and a half or something. He said, he who would have this knowledge must get away from this earthly existence. How does he do it? How do we get away from this earthly existence? If any individual can get away from his or her part of earthly existence, he can transcend it as a whole. If you want to transcend this consciousness of Bur Loka, you have got to transcend your part of the earthly existence. Now, what is your part of the earthly existence? Is it your house and your car and your friends? Maybe, but that's sort of after the fact. We don't feel the pain of a friend physically. We don't feel a leak in the house when the plumbing breaks. We don't feel that. What we feel, what we perceive really is this body. And we have desires and fears in this world based on this body. The friends we like to see, the experiences we want to have, the food we want to eat, all this stuff is through this body. This body is our portion of the earthly existence. So in order to transcend our portion of the earthly existence, we have to transcend these bodies. That's the basic teaching. And so, how do we do that? Now, those of us who have been studying Vedanta for a while, this is probably starting to sound a little bit familiar, transcending the body consciousness. He says, if I can transcend this physical existence of mine, then I will become free, not only of this body, but of all earthly existence. And I will be able to go to a higher existence. So he's kind of giving us a hint as how he did this. So transcending this body, he says, and everything else in Vedanta says, means transcending the desire and fear associated with this body. We desire sensual experiences. I want to go see that movie. I want to, and we enjoy these things. I like to have an electric blanket on a cold winter's night. You know, that's a Bur Loka experience, or a hot cup of coffee, or an ice cream cone, lick an ice cream cone on a hot summer day. These are all desirable sensual experiences. We like these things. And of course, we have fear of sensual pain. We do all kinds of things here that we're maybe not so happy with, like earning money because we have to have a roof, because we don't want to have exposure, we don't want to go hungry. We've got to provide for this thing. And so fear of pain motivates a lot of our actions. So fear of pain, desire for pleasure, these define our portion, what he calls our portion of earthly existence. If we can overcome these things, if we can overcome the fear of pain and the desire for pleasure, according to Swami Ashokananda and the rest of Vedanta, we can transcend our portion of the earthly existence and experience these higher worlds. So, one fact that Vedanta tells us over and over again, and that those of us who have tried this already know, is that this is not very easy to do. You know, it may sound simple enough, giving up fear of pain and search for pleasure, but in practical speaking, it is an extremely challenging task. And Vedanta teaches that this consciousness, this desire for pleasure, and this fear of pain has entered into our awareness so deeply that we really can't conceive of any other existence. We think we will live in these bodies forever. We don't. Intellectually, we have an idea that this body's going to die. I know I'm going to grow old and die. And yet, I do not act that way. This is Yudhishthira's greatest miracle. For those of you who have read the Mahabharata, the sage asks Yudhishthira, what is the most, of all the miraculous things in this world, what's the most miraculous? He says that even though we all see people dying around us all the time, no man really thinks that he will ever die. And that's how we live here. That's how we roll. We don't think, oh, maybe today's my last day on earth. I guess I don't need to put any money in the bank. We put money in the bank forever because we're going to live here forever. And we act in our daily life, whatever intellectual conceptions we have, we act in our daily life like we're going to be here forever. And Vedanta says it's because this fear of pain and search for pleasure has ingrained itself in us so deeply. And it's actually not just Vedanta that teaches this, but you can find, amazingly, of all places, you can find this in the Muslim Jesus. But the problem is, we think we're here in this world forever. We think that we are human beings in this room trying to become spiritual. According to these teachings, that's not what we are. We are spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. And this is something, as I tried to point out in the beginning through the near-death literature, this is something that to me seems compellingly reasonable. This idea that there is a consciousness without a body prior to the existence of this body. There is a consciousness apparently within this body during the existence of this body. And this consciousness will go on and do something else somewhere else when this body dies. We are travelers here. And the Muslim Jesus, I mean, maybe you don't know this, the Quran has got Jesus in it. He's just not an incarnation of God, but he's revered and he has all kinds of teachings. And so does the Hadith, the secondary scriptures of Islam, has all kinds of teachings of Jesus. He says, this world is a bridge. Cross it, but do not build upon it. This is not our home. We came from somewhere, a bridge. You come from one side, you cross the bridge, you go to the other side. That's what we're doing here. We have entered this world as a bridge, and we will cross this world and go somewhere else after our experience here is over. And I would encourage all of us to try and remember this idea. If there's one takeaway from today's talk, that we are spiritual beings who are having a temporary human experience, and so is everyone else. We are all spiritual beings here putting on these meat suits. Some of us are more confused than others, but even the dog and the cat and the plants, they are all, according to the Upanishads, the same spirit enters into the plants. We are all spiritual beings wearing these Bur Loka spacesuits. We need to be nice to each other and understand that it's very confusing here and have some sympathy with each other and hopefully some love for each other. We are all going through this bizarre Bur Loka experience together. And some of us are getting confused and hurting each other. And I'm sorry, I wish we weren't. But those of us who have this idea in view, hopefully we can try and remember this. Remember that we are spirits just temporarily wearing these bodies, and so is everyone else, and we are in school here to learn. We're here to learn some lessons and take them on to the next stage of our development, whatever that is, so we can be kind and forgiving with each other to the best of our ability. Okay, may the good Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. May good betide all. May happiness come to all. May all see the face of truth and be fortified with the armor of love, goodwill, joy, and understanding. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us. Peace be unto all. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. So now we have questions and answers. I think I just stay standing right here. Are there any questions? Okay, it's all perfectly clear. There's one. Hi.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really fascinating. I wanted to ask about the 6 planes that you mentioned, and then the seventh. So the 7th plane, which is the Brahma Loka, I have heard that someone going into Brahmaloka cannot retain the body. The body will drop off.
Brahmaloka.
Yeah, Brahmaloka. And so can you say something about that?
Yeah, so again, like I said in the beginning, Swami Ashokananda seems to have this in this lecture and others. He has these ipsi dixits, these assertions based on personal authority that you can't really find anywhere. So what he says is that Brahmaloka is a world without form. What is a world without form? What does that even mean? Does it mean the form is so rarefied that it's no longer really a world anymore? Or, I mean, I don't know. But that's what he says. He says it's a world without form, and at the end of a cycle, you find your identity, or at least unity, subtle difference there, unity or identity with Brahman, with God, the all-pervading. But yeah, he says it's a world without form. Yeah.
Is that similar to Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it really seems like when you read this, is he talking about levels of ascent of the mind, or is he talking about leaving this world and flying around? And it seems like sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. So yeah, that's an excellent question, because there is a one-to-one mapping between these two things, and he never really clarifies that question. But yeah, I had the same question when I read the lecture. I recommend reading it because it's a source of wonder and inspiration. Not that you're going to be able to answer all these kinds of questions, because you won't, unless you have these experiences, I guess. Even then, I'm not sure that the kinds of questions that we have like this can be answered that way. But anyway, it's a fun ride. That was, and I wanted to share the ride with you today. That's really why I did this. Now, anybody else? There's one in the back there.
So, thank you. So you are a student of physics and...
Not anymore. If I got something wrong, that was a long time ago, yeah.
So my question to you would be, we've been trying to understand consciousness in the light of classical physics. And there's also quantum physics. Do you feel quantum physics can have the answer to explain consciousness?
The reason I gave up on physics is because it was weird. It was an experience I had when I was working in the lab. We were arguing about something. It was something basic, something simple like Ampere's law or something. I don't remember. Something very... And it was an electrical engineer I was arguing with. And he says, this is just a model. Somehow that caused a paradigm shift in my mind, where I realized that all this stuff, we're not studying what is in physics. That's not what we're doing. What Kant said about the thing in itself. That's not what we're doing. We're studying our model of what is. That's what we're doing in physics. And so, does anything have the answer in physics? No, I don't think so. That's basically why I lost interest in the subject. I mean, I went through the motions after that. I was at that point, I was kind of close to the finish line. So I finished, and I had other reasons where I basically had to, but I really the enthusiasm for the subject as an answer to anything, I kind of lost it there. And, I still keep up with, if something interesting happens, I'll read about it, but I don't have that. When I started, I thought this is going to give me wisdom and insight into the truth. I had that idea. And yeah, that went away. So quantum, classical, to answer your question, I think you could probably draw a map of consciousness from either one. It might be easier in quantum to have something because quantum's so fuzzy. Quantum's fuzzy. And so you could probably make it fit better because it's more negotiable. Classical mechanics is a little bit more rigid. So probably quantum would be the better place to start. But like I said, I don't think it's going to give you an answer. Yeah.
Back to classical Vedanta.
Okay.
I really enjoyed you sharing Swami and Shokanandaji's experiences, but in classical Vedanta, my understanding is there's a phrase, Anubhavanga Tarka, which means you use logic based on personal experiences, but it's to validate the Shruti, the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutra. But here it apparently has some link to the Puranas.
Well, these things aren't spoken, as far as I know, these things aren't spoken of in the Shruti. I couldn't find any references to these. I mean, you get something about other worlds there be without suns, to these go the slayer of self after the fall of the body. I mean, you get some kind of vague references here and there in the Upanishads, but this hierarchical loka system, that, as far as I know, I haven't seen that in the Upanishads, at least not the principal ones, maybe some other later, lesser Upanishad or something.
Have other Swamis have had the same experience? Because
Not that I know of.
is it universal?
If they did, they didn't talk about it. That's why this lecture is so interesting. I haven't found anything like it anywhere else. And I talked to some of the other Swamis before I brought, last week when I was kind of working out the details of this. And we all agreed that you can't really find this stuff anywhere else. And it's a really fun ride. And to get back to your point, I think it's a good one, that revelation doesn't contradict reason, but it expands upon reason. It reaches to realms where reason cannot. And so frequently, when you read Ashokananda or Vivekananda, you will find them reasoning up to a point and then making some logical leap to something that reason cannot go to. And you'll say, well, how did you get there from this? And they didn't. What they had is the experience at the top, and then they explained how you get there through reason, but you cannot get there through reason. They are speaking through personal experience. And then they'll go back and say, this is how you can reason yourself up to this, but up to this point, you're going to have to trust me because you're going to have this experience for yourself. So that is a frequent pattern that took me, anyway, a long time to figure out reading Swamiji. I'd say, well, how did he get from here to here? Because there's this giant gap. It doesn't contradict the reasoning process at the beginning, and the reasoning process supports it, but it doesn't necessarily infer it. So that's, I'm glad you said that, because yeah, that's a point that is worth emphasizing, yeah.
That's where I would say the leap of faith.
Wait, you need the microphone.
That just made me think of the phrase, a leap of faith. So.
Well, that's actually why I wanted to talk about Swami Ashokananda's spiritual credentials before I started this talk, is because a lot of this stuff can be supported with recent scientific developments, as well as what I said in the beginning with the near-death literature and past life memories of children. A lot of it can be supported, but it cannot be inferred. And so I spoke of Swami Ashokananda's spiritual experiences and his personal history with the idea of trying to communicate to you that he is a spiritual authority. And so while we don't have any scientific or logical reason to refute what he says, we also can't really say, yes, science points unequivocally to this conclusion. It doesn't, but it does point in that direction. And so, yeah, if you're going to accept his teachings, then I tried to make the leap of faith small. That's what I tried to do. Yeah. Mr. President.
Easy. Just a quick question. Can you cite which one of Swami Shokanandaji's books has that spiritual thought in it?
Yeah, good question. It's called Ascent to Spiritual Illumination, and I would recommend reading the whole thing from front to back. I have done so many times, and you will find it very inspirational. There's lots of stuff in there, not just that lecture. That is the very last lecture in the book. And it is indeed, all of his lectures could be called an ascent to spiritual illumination, because that's generally what he does. He starts somewhere and goes up, 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 up. And it can be very inspirational, these talks. I found them very inspirational. They can also be very intimidating, because you read these things and you think, wow, I'm just kicking around in the shallow end of the pool here, and here's this guy who's doing swan dives off the deep end. So I mean, that part, that can be a little disconcerting, I guess. But at the same time, there's a sense of wonder too, because what he says and what they all say is that you too can have this experience. There's nothing special about me. This is something that he says, and they all say. In fact, as far as I know, only Sri Ramakrishna says, my spiritual experiences are for others to refer to. He actually admits Ordinary people aren't going to have this. He actually says that. I mean, he says some things that they can have, but then there's a realm where basically he's an avatar and this is it, you know. But the ceiling is still very high. And we can have these experiences, we just can't come back and talk to other people about them. That's generally the idea. So, yeah, I would recommend the book highly. And he has another great one, The Soul's Journey to Its Destiny. That's another great book that he's got, another collection of his lectures. You can find, there's various, it's all Googleable, you know. But yeah, so the answer to your question is Ascent to Spiritual Illumination, the last lecture in the book. Had it? Okay, your turn.
Thank you.